All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Tonight, a very special story for this week's Torah portion begins with incredible drama. Joseph is second only to Pharaoh. His brothers have reluctantly brought Benjamin down to Egypt, only to have Joseph frame Benjamin for stealing. So Parshat Vayigash begins with Judah's heartfelt appeal to save Benjamin. Joseph is so moved that with tears in his eyes, he reveals himself as their brother sold into slavery so long ago. That's how the Torah portion begins. It's a beautiful, emotional moment of reconciliation. But as we know, there are lots of ways to tell a story. And the legends of the Jews, based on the rabbinic storytelling of Midrash, tells this story in a very different way. This tearjerker of a moment gets turned into the following. Joseph carried Benjamin off by force, locking him up in a cell. But Judah broke the door open and stood before Joseph with his brothers. Judah, not hiding the threat in his voice, said, "If I but utter a sound, a pestilence causing death will stalk through the land as far as Thebes." When Judah started to make good on his threat, Joseph made a sign, and Manasseh stomped his foot on the ground so that the entire palace shook. All right, who says we can't do special effects, right? Judah said to himself, only one belonging to our family could do that. He was intimidated by this display of great strength, so he moderated his tone and manner. And time out. Okay, so you may be wondering how Judah could cause a pestilence with just his voice and how Joseph's son Manasseh could cause an earthquake. Thank you to our rabbis. And because it has to do with our rabbis, it's not a surprise that it all starts with a careful reading of the Torah. You see, when Jacob first meets Rachel, he moves a rock off of a well that usually required the efforts of a large group of shepherds. So what's the only conclusion? Jacob has superpowers. Throughout the years, our rabbis tell stories about what that super strength might have looked like. And Louis Ginsburg put it all together into one incredible narrative published in the early decades of the 20th century, The Legends of the Jews. With stories like these, it's shocking, not really, that young Jews were at the heart of the comic book industry that also got started at the beginning of the 20th century. And now, back to our story. You see, Judah, he tries to reason with Joseph, explaining their father's suffering. But without any compassion, Joseph replied, "Why didn't you speak up for your other brother, who you sold for 20 pieces of silver? You didn't care about your father's sorrow then." And yet Joseph was innocent, while Benjamin has committed theft. Therefore, go and say to your father, the rope has followed after the bucket. These words had such an effect upon Judah that he broke out in sobs and cried aloud, "How shall I go up to my father and the lad not be with me?" His outcry reached a distance of 400 parasangs, which is very far, and the whole land was on the point of collapsing from the great noise. Joseph's valiant men lost their teeth, and the cities of Pitom and Ramses were destroyed, and they remained in ruins until the Israelites built them up again. You always wondered why, right? And then Judah's towering rage began to show signs of breaking out. And I kid you not, this is the English translation. His right eye shed tears of blood. The hair above his heart grew so stiff that it pierced and rent the 5 garments in which he was clothed. I'd love to reenact that, but I can't. And he took brass rods and bit them with his teeth and spat them out as fine powder. When Joseph observed these signs, fear befell him, and in order to show that he too was a man of extraordinary strength, he pushed with his foot against the marble pedestal upon which he sat, and it broke into splinters. Judah exclaimed, "This one is a hero equal to myself." More massive feats of strength followed, which we'll look at in greater depth tomorrow morning, if you want to join us tomorrow morning, until finally, Joseph realized that his brothers were indeed on the point of destroying Egypt, and he resolved to make himself known to them. It's fascinating storytelling that was created most of the time, right? It was during times of difficulty, when our rabbis wanted to provide inspiration and hope, as well as something to take the people's minds off of the challenge and the struggle. Then it was repackaged and made available in German and then English in the early 1900s during a time of hope and optimism, and also its own sense of hardship. It's a reminder that whatever we're going through, number one, we need good stories. And while we might not be able to create an earthquake by stomping on the ground, we may not be able to snap our fingers and cure a pandemic. But what we can do is we can keep sharing the story. And maybe by sharing the story, we'll come to realize that we have a deeper reserve of strength than we knew. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos.